Hi, it's Willow from OutCenter, and I'm just recording a short intro to the first video in a brand new series called OutCenter Interviews. As you might guess from the title, this is a new show that we're doing where we're talking to experts and folks from the LGBT community and advocates and artists who want to share their passion and their knowledge with folks in our community. So, what that means is we're going to talk to artists and directors, like today, and also therapists, psychologists, those that work within the advocacy space, and others who just have interesting and neat LGBT and queer stories to share. So, we're kicking off this brand new series by talking to Savannah Kaminski. As you'll hear us discuss in the interview, we're going to talk about her upcoming film on queer romance, but we're also going to talk about her story growing up in a rural environment where there wasn't always welcoming or inclusive environments, and also what it means to think artistically and maybe even a little bit philosophically about sapphic and lesbian romance. So I hope that you will enjoy video number 1 in our series, and if you like it, share, comment, interact with these videos. And if you want to support our work to continue to make videos like this, just head over to outcenter.org/donate. Okay, let's jump right into the interview.
My name's Savannah Kaminski. I grew up in Michigan and as a military kid, so I was actually kind of all over the place. I'm a writer, director, and script supervisor in film. Multifaceted, but it's kind of what you got to do in the indie game. Yeah, I'm bisexual myself, and I am coming out with a movie called I Know the End about two Amish girls who fall in love at a young age and are navigating that close-minded community aspect. And I myself grew up in southern Georgia to start, and very like Bible Belt side of society, and then moved up to rural Michigan for college and high school. It was definitely an experience growing up and trying to pinpoint and navigate like who I am in all of that.
I have so many things that I'm curious about in there, but I would love to know how you went from growing up in southern Georgia to rural Michigan, what we're very familiar with, and how you went from those environments to understanding yourself as a queer person.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my dad is military. He joined when I was two, which for so this film, as a little backstory, is based on my mom's upbringing. She was brought up Amish, so it's her upbringing with a little bit of my life sprinkled in there. And so they both left the Amish community and moved to Georgia. And because he deployed so much, we were there for like 13 years. And then in high school, when I was about 15, we moved back up to Michigan. So, and I feel like a lot of my childhood in Georgia was just spent with like the religious aspect of it, me trying to be the people pleaser that I am, of like, this is how I need to grow up, this is how I need to be. I need to follow the church guidelines, even though a big part of myself felt like I never fully aligned with what they taught or believed. I always believed in like the moral aspect of it, but there were some things, especially when it came to being queer or growing or like being around queer people, that there hit a line where they would always be like, you can be nice to them, but you shouldn't be them, or you shouldn't be friends with them. And that would always like made me like raise an eyebrow and be like, but like, why not? Because I feel like love is at its most purest form. It should never have been something that's negative and like judged upon. But I spent a long time like questioning that growing up, and then we ended up moving to Michigan, and I started stepping out of the church a little more just because we didn't have as much of a church community there. And I went from high school there with a lot of people were just one single like type of person. Like you didn't get a lot of variety. And actually, one of my closest friends we ended up going to college to Michigan together, and he actually came out to me when we were in our freshman year, and I remember that was a big deal for our friendship, and it was a very big thing. And then I have always, this is a tangent, I've always felt like it was always a piece of my identity, but I never really had a full coming out. I feel like this movie probably to a lot of people is what it is. I was always kind of like, this is a piece of me, and whether I show up with a woman or a guy or whatever partner I end up showing up with, I was like, I was just gonna see where the cards may lay at the time. But so that's a little bit a long-winded tangent of where I started and where I got to and where I am now making this movie.
What I'm hearing rolled up in there is this communal aspect of coming out, but then also your own career and skill set in the arts. How does that community, like knowing other queer people, and how do the arts kind of all coalesce into understanding more about your identity?
I went to school in Ann Arbor, and that kind of gave a whole new aspect of people to get to know and types of people to become familiar with. And it was my first little step out into the world where I was like, oh, this is a new branch of people. Like, there are people more wanting to find their identity and more be themselves and everything. But I still feel like they're, especially in rural areas such as Michigan, because even while Ann Arbor is a bigger city, I feel like compared to other cities in the world, it's still a little bit more on the like rural side of everything. I would get pieces of people's identity, but everyone was still very much rooted in the same, like, oh, we follow the same norms and everything. And, but still, I found a good community of people there who felt very good in their identities and wanted to explore those and wanted to discover more about themselves. And that was a big first step into what created this movie, actually. And then it was even furthered when I came to California and was met with even more people that were like so much a part of themselves. And there were so many different cultures and people around here to learn from and experience. And this all came into what I wanted to say because my original goal as a writer is to give voices to people that you don't often hear their voices from. And this movie was a way to give a voice to those people that grew up in really religious communities or really overbearing communities that said this is the exact type of person that you need to be, and the whole world is spelled out for you, and you know exactly the path that you're going on because someone told you that that's the path that you should go on. And it's not until you step out of that bubble and you meet more people and like build a community around you of people that actually have different lives and different stories and different identities where you actually learn that there's a little bit more to the world than that single pathway. And to me, a big thing that led from that community that I grew in college and my close friends and then my own identity, it led into my art so much because wanted to hone in so much on those specific feelings and tell a story that would resonate with people that experience those same things, whether they really fully realize it before watching the movie or not. And so that's a big impact of how I'll I'll come up with my concepts and my ideas, and it was a big thing that led to this specific idea.
I think one of the themes that you've told me about in your own life and identity, and also one of the themes of the film, is the particular identity or label or understanding of a Sapphic identity or Sapphism. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that term and also like what it means as an identity marker within the LGBTQ community.
So my movie is about two girls. Their names are Esther and Mary, and we follow them at two different points in their life, when they're 16 and then when they're 20 to 23. So it's when they originally fall in love, and then 7 years later when they come back from being shunned. One comes back from being shunned, and one stayed in the community and is getting married to the bishop's son and is following that like lifeline of like that she's always known, while the other one has went off and explored a little bit more of her own identity. And they come back and they both have to deal with like where they're at their points in life. And this movie originally was actually not going to be queer. I actually wanted to base it upon my mom and my dad's original storyline of like how they met. But I felt like there just wasn't enough me in that story and there wasn't enough of a theme to go about it. And I started thinking about, oh, what kind of things could I launch? What kind of themes could I get into? And I felt like a voice that we don't often hear from is women, especially sapphic women and lesbian women in movies and media. And I started racking my brain of what movies, what things have I seen that are pretty mainstream that involve two female characters that are falling in love and are just living their life and aren't being overly sexualized or overly this one stereotype of women. And I honestly couldn't think of any mainstream things. And I felt like this is definitely a voice that needed to be touched on a little bit. And I even got a message from someone I put in some group chats from Amish communities about like the movie, and I was trying to be like, what are some authentic things I can bring to the movies that you felt like you experienced growing up in the community? And one woman side messaged me, and she said that there's a lot of stories about gay people in the community, but there's never any about lesbians or sapphic people in the community coming out because women are always more quieter about what they do and they're always more kept more quiet and their stories are kept more quiet and they're kind of just kept to the sideline. And I felt like this was a good start to bring a little bit more of those voices out into the world, especially those that you haven't seen in movies or anything. And yes, we've had Heated Rivalry come out and we've had all of the classics like Brokeback Mountain. Yes, bringing out the queer community a little bit, but still there aren't enough mainstream just supporting women and femme people to the light.
I think it's interesting that you bring up some of the, very controversial gay films and also some current TV shows that are very, very popular, despite some of the general wider social cultural pushback on queer people. But what does it mean to you that very often these main characters or themes surround gay men? Why don't we see sapphic love in media so much? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I've actually been told straight up by people when I was pushing this film out and marketing it just in networking events that lesbians and women are less marketable than their male counterparts are. So, and that's something that I definitely don't understand all the way why it's true. And I've had many debates with people about why it is because there's always people are always trying to relate to the male audience in a sense. And I feel like when it comes to Heated Rivalry, when it comes to all the queer men shows, which are I still very much support and love all of those movies, they still cater to a bigger audience than some people think that lesbians or sapphic media will, which I obviously think I don't agree with because I think there's a huge support of people that would actually push for this and want to see this, but because a lot of them are women, sometimes that can be pressed down a little bit and silenced. I've been noticing a lot of the shifts in like the patriarchy and gender norms, and I've been studying that a lot in the last like year or so, especially with this movie and me trying to do the media for it. And a big thing I noticed was the coming out of the Heated Rivalry TV show and everyone loving it. I loved it. I watched it like two or three times. It was so good. And then flashback a month or two later to the announcements for the new Bridgerton show to come out, with coming out as like the first lesbian like season and TV show, and a lot of backlash hitting that of people saying they didn't want that storyline to change and people saying that they didn't want to see it. Whereas me and my sister and a lot of my friends are very excited to finally have that representation and finally have that storyline, no matter what they have to change from the books, to be finally represented and telling a beautiful love story like that it's just very easy to see how big of a discrepancy there is because there are some indie movies of Sapphic characters and but they are very indie and never mainstream. And it's that simple fact of like me going up to like producers and being told that it's less marketable to sell these women than it is to sell male characters. And I've even been told before to swap the genders and that it would fix everything. But it's very hard to hear, but it also makes me power up even more to want to push this out into the world because I feel like it's something that people need to see.
Like, what is Sapphism? Because I feel like there's probably some people that know the term like lesbian or lesbianism, but I think that there's just so much more to like what Sapphism is. Like, as like, I think when we were writing back and forth, like I wrote about like the Sapphic gaze, Gaze.
Yeah.
But like why that is an artistic thing and also partially, why the artistic thing relates to the identity, why the identity relates to the artistic thing, and like what makes it special, especially as opposed to like heated rivalry and like other media like that.
So there's the male gaze and there's the female gaze and then we've got the sapphic gaze is also we can have that as its own definition. And film and media at its whole is a very male dominated industry and they typically will have, I don't know if you've heard, there's like a sound going around. It's from the Little Women, actually, the 2019 Little Women, about how every women's story in narrative and film will often lead to either a wedding or a death. And it's kind of describing what that role of women can sometimes play in art and media. And it's sometimes often not always in the case because I feel like we are starting to break walls, will cater to whatever the man's story needs to uphold. And the sapphic gaze, which I'll kind of combine with the female gaze a little bit, is that idea of kind of humanizing women and showing more of their emotional connection, showing more of how they can love without just being overly sexual. I think I mentioned earlier, they're showing the human parts of like how they love in a relationship, how they see each other, how they all go together in different ways because it actually is very different how two women or two femme people love each other over how maybe two men do or a man or a woman do because it's very different ways they have their love language and very different ways of how they exhibit those things. And especially for film, I kind of want to start showing women, especially queer women and just femme and other women in general as well-rounded characters and not just something to aid someone else's story. I want them to have like backstories. I want them to have gray areas and be good and bad and showing that they have ways that they can really fall in love and fall deeply in love, but they also have things they fear about love and things that aren't necessarily that easy for them to love. And that's a big thing that I try to bring into this story because both of the girls have backgrounds that are very different and vary in how they get to the places they are, but they both end up at the same place. How do we love each other in this world in comparison to how the rest of the world tells us to love, and that kind of vibe. So that's a little bit about what I think the sapphic gaze means and how it's incorporated. It can be incorporated into film in opposition to that male gaze of like, a woman walking into the room and immediately stripping off into off all her clothes and getting into the satin nightgown and like being an object to look at and aid in other people's stories.
So it sounds like bringing Sapphism into media is about like decentering men. It's about removing this objectification of women in media, and also it sounds like not making women means to the ends of male characters, like just as the love interest or like somebody that strengthens them on their own heroic journey or something. But then there's also this aspect of like sapphic love. Like, what is it that makes sapphic love different than just sort of straight love or men loving men type of love. Like, what makes Sapphism so special?
It's a part of my own life, but I think it tells such more deeper of a storyline, in my opinion, because it's these types of loves. It's just such a pure and innocent type of love. I feel like when it comes to, and this is me talking on a very basis level, so I know everyone's got their own niche ways and how they do it, but I feel like a lot of sapphic relationships are the type that come from that like friendship bond and like that very like feminine, like gentle, like being friends and loving each other because of the person that you are, and then coming and then growing together and coming to terms with the rest of the relationship. Where I feel like, and again, I'm gonna say I'm very speaking on a basis, so everyone's different. Where sometimes with straight relationships or more male relationships, I feel like it can be a lot of lust to start out with, and it can, and especially in like media, like with heated rivalry. I don't know, I'm gonna keep referencing this, and even Brokeback Mountain, and it's like it'll start out very lustful and sexual, and then it leads into the romance. Whereas my story, and I feel like a lot of other sapphic stories that I tend to love, and in the real world and in film, is starts out as like a genuine friendship, and it's kind of that friends to lovers like vibe of like slowly coming together and discovering that. So I think it's I think all forms of love are beautiful. I'm a very avid storyteller. I love stories in all of its form, but I tend to go towards the more sapphic stories for me because I feel like not only is that love just a quieter one that you don't hear as often, but it's also just such a beautiful one to show visually and like show the growth of.
First off, all makes my heart so happy. Um, I think there's like the softness of it. There's like something unrestrained, but not in a, like you said, not like in a lustful way, but like, is there a way to be unrestrained in a very soft, in a very, you're right, it is sort of like hard to describe, but I think this is where like having a whole movie to sort of meditate on it is probably helpful to anybody, even if they are not themselves identifying as sapphic. But with that, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about your film.
The film, yeah. So it's called I Know the End, and it is about two girls named Esther and Mary. And Esther has grown up in the Amish community her entire life, and Mary joined when she was 10 years old. And the two began a beautiful friendship growing up in this community, and soon that friendship turns to more. And both end up living separate lives on and journeys on how they navigate that community. And we've come to find them 7 years later when Esther is about to be married, 2 weeks away from to the bishop's son, and about to settle into her perfect ideal life as the Amish girl when Mary comes back for the first time in 7 years after being shunned from the community and disappearing on everybody. And then the movie is kind of about the two of them navigating not only their feelings for each other and their own identities, but their identities within this community that is so strict and so close minded against any outside opinions, and navigating that whole lifestyle. And I chose the Amish because I feel like that is also a community that doesn't get a lot of light shown into it. And being as my mom grew up in it, I have a lot of insider scoops and everything, and to show a little bit about how it works and a little bit more of how especially the religious aspect works, because that's its very own niche aspect in its own way. In the Amish, they live their own little world out there. But that is a little summary, and I hope everyone wants to hear more.
I mean, I am champing at the bit to hear more about it, but I think I'll probably have to wait and see, as it were. I think some themes that folks, especially in our area, might be curious about is how does religion, and especially in some cases high control or coercive control religion, how does this interact with queer identity? So I'm just curious, for instance, how do these two girls in your film discover that they're like in love with each other or like more than friends with each other? And how do you think about this and how it works in general?
So this actually ties into a little bit about what I was saying about my lens of the Sapphic gaze and everything, because I actually, a big part of how I was pushing this love, and I can tell a little bit about my backstory in this as well. I pushed this love as love in its most purest form, which is love that starts as friendship and builds onto each other until it is just undeniable. And so it is something that I wanted to build as something innocent, pure, and just something that nobody can deny, which I'm kind of repeating myself here, that is there, because I feel like so often in religion, people just think it's such an easy part flip switch to flip on and off, and such an easy thing to say, well, just don't be that way, or you're obviously making this choice to love this way or to be this person. And I don't think it is a choice. I think love is one of its most natural forms of being, and I wanted to show that with these two girls in this film, of like that it's not something to fear, and it's not something to be disgusted by, because it's just so beautiful and innocent. And like you see them in every point of their life, from 10 years old to 16 to 22, and you're seeing all these different points in their life where at the end of the day, like what it comes down to is that they just have so much love for each other, even despite all the things that people say are not right towards them. And it kind of ties into a lot with religion and how I grew up, because I grew up in a very Baptist setting and sat there always feeling like I had to be the people pleaser and be the perfect little girl, because I've even had Sunday school teachers DM me about the movie and be like, "You were such a nice girl. Like, I don't you know what the Bible says about about this and like blah blah blah." And I'm like, but how? I was like, but that seems like such a man-made profession to me, because how is something so natural and so good? How why would it ever be bad? But that's a whole other tangent. But I grew up and I would sit in the pew every Sunday. I had gotten saved at a very young age, but I always felt like I was never doing things. I was doing things right visually, but like internally, I knew I had so many different feelings and thoughts than the other girls and kids, and was so much. I wanted to explore so much more of the world than everyone else, and I felt that was so impure of me. So I would sit there every Sunday, like begging God to like fix me, and begging God to like help me understand why I was the way I was, and why it wasn't just so easy for me to like give into what everyone else was giving into. And I would re-say the salvation prayer every Sunday, like being like, "Oh, it'll stick this time. It'll stick." And I brought that feeling with me all into growing up, and I wanted to put it into, because I always describe this film as like I it's kind of like a tattoo. Like I always recommend, when you get your first tattoo, do something really personal and then have fun with it. And so I wanted my first feature film project. I've done shorts and everything, but I wanted this first big feature that I wrote to be very personal. And so I kind of wanted to tell that story of what it felt like sitting in that pew and feeling different than everybody else, and wanting to explore more of my own identity but not knowing how. And I wanted to describe that feeling somehow. So I put it into my character, and gave a little bit of that feeling and her to from me to describe the story. And I think it gives that unique perspective of growing up in that religious sense, and growing up queer and growing up different than what everyone says you should, and sitting there and like not knowing how to cope with it.
Yeah, I think for those of us, myself included, that have had to wrestle with queer identity and religious identity, can probably draw a lot out of this film. I guess, I'm curious about how you would characterize your own spirituality or connection to religion, or supernatural or woo woo esoteric stuff. Where do you find yourself in that, or if that at all?
I've found myself lately believing, and I've been claiming it more to be the universe because I definitely believe there is a force and a, a push like or leading us all in the right direction and genuinely wants things to work out for us in its best way. But I have strayed a little bit from going to churches because I believe in the morals and I believe in the basis sense of everything, but I feel like the people themselves, as a blanket statement, can, and from what I've experienced, can be what can start to begin to be judgmental and close minded versus the religion itself and the beliefs itself are firm and are something that you can practice and believe in your own day to day life and own sense. And I don't, and it took a long time to wrestle with like having to choose either this or that, but I kind of came to be as I can believe, I can still believe in the things and the morals that I believed growing up, but I no longer have to hold myself accountable to the people and I can hold myself accountable to me and whatever force ends up being out there. And I felt like that helped me grow in that a lot more. And that was there was a lot of wrestling with that in college, especially when I originally decided to leave.
I think what that gives me hope for is that folks who are curious about Sapphism or are curious about the story that you tell in your film, I hope that they can use some of what's depicted as a way of making sense of their own story through these stories of other people. Um, I'm wondering with that then, what are some takeaways besides that? When somebody watches your film, what then happens, or what would you want to happen? What do they take away from it?
So I definitely want to take away that feeling that I talked about with the I kind of label it as religious OCD that the character has, and that feeling of growing up in that and being able to have that decision of like whether you stay or go. But a big thing that I want as a takeaway, and this has been the main theme that I've kind of been telling people about, is and in a way that I can relate to more than just queer and sapphic people, is that idea of being in a closed-minded community. And this came to me even like growing up in Michigan, where I grew up around a lot of people who had a lot of different opinions than me, and being in that closed-minded community and having the courage to step outside of it and explore other worlds, other people, other opportunities that are outside of maybe the one thing that you grew up in. Because I feel that every person eventually has to make that decision in their life on whether they stay in one place or they go and experience other things. And I don't necessarily think that everyone has to move or leave, or because sometimes like home is home and it's very special, but I do think that it should always be encouraged that when you do step out into the world, to step out with that open-mindedness of knowing that there are people who are living other lives and other stories and are trying just as hard to have that happy ending as everybody else. And that's a huge takeaway that I want to bring out into it. And then also just that, especially at the ages of like in your early 20s when you're trying to come up with who you want to be in life, that it's okay to be wrong sometimes and to have a couple step backs and to have to, and that it's completely normal to have two big choices and want everything in the world and then have to figure out how to navigate both wanting one thing and another and kind of meeting in the middle sometimes with that, or sometimes even just getting the one thing and having to wait and grow yourself until you're ready for the next. And so those are two big takeaways that I kind of want people to watch this movie with and come out with. And then I just hope that they fall in love with the two girls as much as me and my two actresses have. And I am excited for everyone to live the story through them.
I think that that is a good place to put a pin in this because I mean, I've enjoyed getting to talk with you about Sapphism and also about your film and also what it's like to grow up in a rural area because it's its own ball game, growing up in a city or in a more urban environment that's more multicultural. can allow someone to have experiences that are more inclusive. And for some of us, we have to be late bloomers because we have to kind of get out from under some of those things. So I hope that this film provides some more language and an example, fictional case study of people who are finding and understanding love in ways that aren't just the standard, cis normative way or straight focused way of thinking of things.
Exactly. I'm excited to share it. I'll keep a lookout for the story. We're filming the proof of concept this July, which is going to be a short 10 minutes of primarily Mary's childhood and her journey. So I'm excited to share a piece of it sooner and then as we grow and get the rest of the film on the way. But I've loved talking about it with you.
Yeah. And where would you like to direct people to learn more about you and or the film?
Yes, so right now you can follow us on Instagram, either mine, which is at Sav Kaminski, or we also have a page called I Know the End dot film. Let me make sure that's right. I Know the End film, and we also have a Seed and Spark page where we are doing our final bits of fundraising. We actually just got greenlit on it, so now it's just a matter of um, getting getting the money to help provide money for the crew and food for the crew and stuff like that. Yeah, so it's I Know the End film on Instagram as well. And you can follow us there. I will be posting updates and behind the scenes stuff, and we're sharing all the stories and how we led up to this movie.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure people will enjoy checking that out and following the updates as they come about. I know that I certainly will. But just to close out, thank you so much for spending some time talking with us today. I hope people will learn about Sapphism and learn about your film and others' experiences. I just really appreciate you taking the time out of a busy production and filming schedule to chat with us today.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed talking about this. I've been talking on my friend's ear about it, so it was nice. It was nice having someone else to talk to about it, and I hope that I would love to hear everyone else's opinion on it too. So I hope that everyone gains something from this. And yeah,
Awesome. Well, thanks, Savannah. Well, we will chat with you later.
yeah, absolutely. Bye.